Well, hi there. I'm Mike, and this is Bella's Vistas on YouTube. Are your pictures not sharp enough? Use your camera. Back in the day, I used to use a Leica, and I would use the hyperfocal distance. You would look on the scale on the lens, and you would see what range. If you're at f1.4, you'd have a very shallow depth of field. f11, you'd have more. f16, a great deal. And if you wanted a really sharp print, say at 11:14 or 16:20, you'd go a little bit tighter than what it said. If it said f11, you'd probably go to f16. And that was called using the hyperfocal distance. You would focus at a point probably 1/3 in, and then the rest of the image would be sharp from behind, and you'd have a sharp image with as much focus as possible. The other thing would be to use say this is a 300mm lens, so the rule of thumb would be to use 1/300, so a 300th of a second would give you a sharp result. But these days, they say that in times of rapid change, experience is your worst enemy. So we have to make sure that we take advantage of all the features that we've got here. This lens, in particular, in this body, has a great image stabilization. Now you can turn that off with the click of a switch here. Now, with a 300mm lens, I could only use, say, 1/300th of a second or maybe 1/600th of a second. But with all the stabilization on this lens and in the body, I think it's 8 kinds of stabilization. The best thing to do is to do some test shots and see how slow you can go. Like, I can shoot a 1/30th of a second with this lens if I'm bracing myself a little bit, and that's like way like the difference between 1/300 to a 1/30th. So you have an incredible benefit of the stabilization here. It really helps a lot. Now, of course, the simple things like keep your lens clean, just blow the dust off mostly, and maybe use a little lens brush like this. This is a really old one. What I like about it is it's like that, and you can brush any dust off. Another thing for the autofocus that you should worry about is on the back of the lens are these little contacts here. They have to be kept clean, because that means that your focus is working if the lens is communicating with the body. But I just had a problem with my usual lens that I use for vlogging, where the diaphragm stopped communicating with the body due to a broken blade. I had to send that away. And I won't have that lens back for a month, perhaps, maybe longer, and that's a big problem. But that's aside from this. I'm shooting this with my phone, so I would usually use the 12-40 on there. Now, the other thing you have with your focus is I can go in here and I press the OK, and that shows me that I have a single point of focus. And you can expand that to a wider for autofocus. And the best result if you're in low light is to use a single point on the scale. So you close that down to a single point. This is all going to be different depending on your camera, but I go to a single point, and then I will move that point around just by using the arrow keys, or in this case with the joystick here, you can move that focus point wherever you want, and then you'll be focusing. You won't have to focus and recompose. You can move that, if you have time for that, you can move that point around. If you run and gun, I usually use it right in the middle, and I'll focus on the thing and then recompose and shoot. So that's important. So let's see, we covered the focus point, moving the focus point around, single autofocus instead of continuous autofocus. Single autofocus will give you a better result in very low light. Here I can precisely adjust my focus point on the back of the camera. What a wonderful night. The blue hour is upon us. Bugs are everywhere. I gotta get moving. The bugs are killing me. Now another thing you can do is use manual focus. On this lens you just click back this and you're into manual focus, and I have it set for focus peaking. There's different types of focus assist. Some of them will magnify the image 10 times. I find that very hard to use, and the focus peaking is a good thing that works very well. You can use that. So that's another thing you can do. So basically, to make sure you're getting sharp pictures, keep your lens clean and don't scrub it all the time. You know, sometimes I will use a lens wipe like this. These are sealed and you just rip it open and clean the lens, but you don't do that all the time. You just try to blow the dust off, and the less cleaning you do, the better. So keep your lens clean, make sure the contacts are clean. Know when to use manual focus. Sometimes manual focus is the only thing that'll work. You might have a bird behind a branch in a tree, and you try using autofocus and you can't get it onto them. Even with like subject recognition, that works a lot of the times, but sometimes it won't work and you have to use manual focus. The other thing you could do is stop down a little bit. Like I usually shoot with this wide open at f8, which is slow enough, but if you stop down to f11, if you've got enough light, that'll help. And I find the lens without the converter, if I put the teleconverter on here, I've got the MC20, that'll double this lens and you got a really long focal length, but the autofocus is slower and perhaps not as good, and vibration comes into play more. But so the main thing is to know your camera. Remember, in times of rapid change, experience can be your worst enemy. So the old practices of using the hyperfocal distance, instead of that, now there's a depth of field preview button on my camera. I can push that and I'll see what's sharp and what isn't in the picture. And failing that, take a picture and zoom in. Another thing we can do is use focus stacking. There's automatic focus stacking in here, but long before I ever used that, I would focus and shoot, and then I would focus on the foreground and shoot, and combine those two images in Photoshop and mask out the parts that I don't want. So the main thing is to use all the features on your camera. We've got all this high zoot stuff, so we might as well use it. And always remember, like Ansel Adams said, the worst thing is a sharp picture of a fuzzy idea. So make sure you've got a good concept behind your picture. Then you can go ahead and focus on the subject itself, focus on the foreground, or in a really deep situation you might want to have 3 focus points maybe, and combine those. It's all doable with the software that we've got these days. So take advantage of the image stabilization and learn what you can get away with. Learn how high you can push your ISO and still get a good result. That's something else that I do. A lot of times I'll use the manual settings with automatic focus. Then I can decide, do I need a high shutter speed? If there's motion in the picture, you need more of a shutter speed. Sometimes you might be using 2500 or 1/3000th of a second. You don't have to worry much about camera shake on shots like that, but your f-stop is going to be wide and your ISO gets pushed up through the roof, so you're going to need to use maybe noise reduction in post-processing. But if we take advantage of all the features of the camera, first you have to learn what they are and learn how to do them. Like you can use live focus, live view, you push the live view button and you can see your subject on the back of the camera. If you're on the tripod, you can move it around and get the focus exactly where you want it, and then do a test shot and see, do I need to focus on the foreground again and on the background, and then combine those images so that I've got sharpness from the beginning to the end. And you don't always want that. Sometimes it's nice to have the subject in focus and have the background and the foreground gone so that there's no doubt what you were shooting at. Another technique that I like to use is to use manual setting on my camera. Like there's a whole bunch of presets and I hardly use program at all. But I'll use the manual setting and I'll choose what shutter speed I need. If it's a fast moving subject, then I'll set the shutter speed high and my aperture more wide. If I want more depth of field, I'll use a tighter f-stop and a slower shutter speed, like I might be using f11 or f8. And I'll have my ISO set at automatic. Now I do have to watch that my ISO doesn't go too high, because if you get really, really high ISO, you're not going to have a sharp result. But this way I can adjust fast. I adjust my f-stops here for depth of field, my shutter speed here, and the automatic ISO will take up the slack for me and make sure that I get at least a good exposure, and that's helpful. But you got to watch that ISO. The new features in Lightroom, the denoise really helps a lot, but denoising is, you know, the more you denoise it, you're going to lose a bit of sharpness maybe. And there's other software like Topaz that helps too to remove noise. So take advantage of everything we've got. Wow, so I guess to sum it all up, I'm saying use the features of your camera, use the software we've got to the best of our ability, keep your gun clean, and go from there. So if you got any comments, please let me know. Thanks for visiting. Got lots of videos on Bellas Vistas for you to see. We're on a really cool trip right now, and I hope you're going to enjoy it. Thanks very much. Keep coming back.